There we are. So BPMN, Business Process Model and Notation, and intro. And this is what it's about. So let's talk about the main pieces, the main artifacts that go into it, that define it. These are known as elements and notations. So there are different pieces of the puzzle. The first one is known as a flow object. So I'm going to try and have a highlighter. There's something called a flow object. The flow object's main job is it describes every and all movements within a process. So any kinds of things that are happening within the process, it describes that. That's all it is. It describes things. Something is happening, and you've got events which are shown as circles. You have activities which are shown as or depicted as rounded rectangles. You have gateways which are depicted as diamonds. So once again, these are all three types of flow objects: events, which are circles; activities, which are rounded rectangles; and gateways that are diamonds. Then you have connecting objects. So connecting objects basically do nothing but connect these pieces. Now that you know, they can be events, they can be activities, there are gateways. The question is, what do they connect to and with? So the to and fro between events, activities, gateways are always shown using connecting flows that go within and outside the organization. The first one is known as a sequence flow. It flows one after the other, right? Something is happening. And that's shown as a solid arrow. And then you have a message flow, which is shown as a dashed arrow. So the message is basically if an information is being passed or not. And then, of course, there's an association, which is shown as a dotted arrow. And we'll cover each of these a little later. Then, of course, you have something called a swim lane. And you may have encountered swim lanes when you're doing your use cases of flow charts or other kinds of process modeling. But a swim lane is basically nothing but that describes and delineates the activities and process organization and categorization. The difference is as follows. A pool is nothing but a large project or an activity group or an organization. For example, you can think of HR digital transformation as a pool. You could think of Kent State IT services as a pool. You could think of the registration system as a pool. You could also think of Kent State University or the College of Business as a pool. Depends on how large or small your pool is. Then, of course, you have lanes. So within each pool, there are multiple different lanes. Each lane basically means who are the stakeholders. So if it's something needs to be approved by a director, by a manager, if something needs to be sent for what they call as a RACI matrix, RACI stands for who's responsible, who's accountable, who's confirmed, who's informed, right? Or who's consulted and who's informed. These would all be different stakeholders in the pool. Each of them asked to do a certain part of the activity or manage certain part of the processes and activities. And lastly, you have artifacts. Artifacts are nothing but the different resources, groupings, and nodes. So artifacts could be data objects. Data objects could be things such as databases, technical resources, some document, a data lake, a specific flat file like an Excel file. A group would be, of course, groups such as support services, people who are experts. Maybe there's an expert group. You need to contact them to know something in order to escalate to maybe an upper level technical service group. So those would be groups, support services, IT, finance, HR, even within them. And then you have annotation. Annotation is nothing but very much the way when we write a code or a program, we annotate different things. It's an annotation of notes and clarifications across a variety of different things, right? So let me see. Let me first stop this stupid bit. Okay, good. Annotations, notes, and clarifications. So you're basically adding some kind of a clarification, some kind of a quick documentation, basically by annotating it. Then, here are the steps. So you start by identifying the objective, initiative, or organization. What is it we're trying to do? For example, what I just talked about, the DMV, the idea is perhaps we should digitally transform the DMV process itself. So that would be your objective or your initiative, right? And DMV itself would be the organization. So this is going to become your pool, which will also define the boundary for the project you're doing. The second one is identify the different stakeholders or functions involved in the pool. So when we are meeting somebody at the DMV, we have multiple different stakeholders or functions, right? Stakeholder might be the clerk. Another stakeholder might be an authorization agency. Another stakeholder might be the data processing or the payment processing third party. So these will all become different swim lanes. So all of these activities, we have to fill out a form. That form has to be securely linked in and connected to a system, right? Either through some kind of near field communication or through Bluetooth or through a server-based setup. The processing has to be done following a PCI compliant system. They would all be different stakeholders. You would be a stakeholder as the customer or the user. And then, of course, the clerk would be the user. You'd be the customer, the clerk would be the user. So once you know DMV digital transformation, then the question is, what are the different stakeholders out there? Both digital stakeholders as well as physical stakeholders. Then what you do is you identify and model the major activities. So you start off with a high level of abstraction and move to greater details. You always start at a high level. You walk in to the DMV, you submit your documents are checked, your documents are approved, what you would call as a service ticket would be created, payment would be accepted, what do you call it, picture would be taken, picture and documentation would be processed, would be sent to, an immediate confirmation would be created for you. It would be sent for card creation. The created card would then be shipped and you would finally receive your card. So that would be the upper level of the higher level of abstraction. Then, of course, detail can be shown as sub-processes can be rather than can be shown as a sub-process. So now you can start showing all the details. What happens when you walk in? What happens when you do this? What happens when you do the next thing? So you always start with what is the existing system? And after that, you go into what do we want the optimal system to look like, or the more intuitive system to look like. So you always start with existing system to intuitive system. Then you know what's going to be the changes, or what are going to be the changes you need to implement in order to get there. After that comes identify the events. So what are the main events? Where do you start? What is the beginning of events? What happens in between? What are the intermediate events? Are they timed? Are they untimed? Does it automatically happen? Do you actually have to manually do it and fill it in? For example, the minute you swipe your credit card, it's a timed event because it's beyond your control. The system takes over and it processes it. And if it returns a value of 0, it basically means that something wrong, something went wrong in the processing. Could you insert your credit card again, or could you tap your credit card again, or swipe your credit card again? On the other hand, if somebody is taking a check in person, then it's an untimed event. The whole idea is if there are events that you can convert into automatic timed events, it's much more intuitive. Then, of course, is where do you end? What is the ending event? Where do you say, this is what culminates the business process? Point number 5, you identify the artifacts. This is important. So, what documents, data, and information do you need to get the job done, right? So you need to make sure that you have access, I don't know, to the driver's license database, to a social security database, to ensure that this is truly a legitimate person. Where in the processes do you need them? You need to know, where do you need to access them? Do you need to access them certain points, multiple points, only one time? Then the question is, it tells you in your intuitive design, should you create a cache? Should you create a session? Should you store them? The question becomes, where are they stored? Where do you store them? Are they stored physically? Or are they stored electronically, digitally? Where are they? Are they on the local machine? Are they on the cloud somewhere? Once, therefore, you've known your objective, what do you want to do? DMV, digital transformation. Who are the different stakeholders? I am, who's the customer, the clerk, who's the user, the payment processor, the credit card, which is also the credit card verification service, or a check verification service, somebody who might be taking the picture if it's a different person, the system that is doing some kind of accuracy and verification checks in the background. That's another piece. So identify all these different stakeholders. Then model the major activities. What are the main activities? And then start drilling down. What goes on within that set? That's your sub-process. Then, of course, you identify the events. Where do we start? What happens in between? Are they automatic, timed, or manual, untimed? And then where do you end? Then you identify the artifacts. In order to get the whole activity set done that's connected between each other, how do we decide what documents we need, what data we need, what information we need, what person you might need? Where do we find them? When do we use them? So where in the process do you need them? And where are they stored? Are they in a different room, sitting? Or is that what you have to go? Like sometimes you'll see salespeople saying, oh, I need to talk to my manager, which is you need an artifact, which is in this case a group. And you go to the manager to ask him or her different questions and then return and make something up. Right, I'm joking. But connect the activities, events, artifacts across the swim lanes. And you're now using the connectors to connect them, the arrows, the dotted ones, the dashed ones. And map existing process and future improved process. So your existing process and the more future intuitively designed improved process. Now, I'll just go full screen. Now we start talking about all these different pieces, these different elements and notations. The first one is called an event. So what exactly is an event? An event is something that happens automatically without you actively doing it, right? So it can, happen automatically without you actually doing it. So something that happens, but it's no longer under your control. For example, the minute you hand your form over, your paper form over to the clerk takes over. It is automatic. That is expected. The minute you hand over your initial check-in at a hospital, the nurse or the administrator or the assistant takes over. So anything that you can't control and automatically takes over is an event. So of course you have beginning events, which is the start of the process. And of course you have a series of intermediate events. That is the event that's triggered automatically, such as the minute you click submit, you create a send email. So think of when I think we may have talked about it, but when we order something on Amazon, the minute we click submit order, it goes. And then it's a timed event because it sits, and I think I talk about it right after that. It's an intermediate event. So it can have a timer when something happens when the time is up. So for example, Amazon waits on an order placement for 30 minutes for cancellation before it starts fulfilling the order. So that's what it does, right? So within 30 minutes, you can just change your mind and cancel the order, which means Amazon is creating an online bin where your order sits for 30 minutes on a timer based on your your minutes and hours, minutes and seconds. And when the timer is up at 30 minutes, the order gets cleared. So you see these intermediate events, so they can all be triggered automatically. Send email, create kitchen order, send online receipt, identify objects such as using a biometric, right? The minute you press something on with your finger or your retinal scan or your facial scan, something happens. Automatically happens, right? LiDAR recognition, and LiDAR is light detection and ranging, very much like radar, which is radio detection and ranging. Sends radio waves. Light, of course, travels far, has a more encompassing field and a different spectral quality, so identifies things even more. And you see autonomous cars having LiDAR setups. Nowadays they're going into video, but that's an example. It automatically recognizes things. A start sensor or camera on an IoT, lock unlock doors, the minute you're there. Or you've seen that if you have an Apple Watch and if you've created a basic logic script for your computer, it says that the minute you've signed in with your Apple Watch and you're close to your computer automatically logs you in. So that's an example of an intermediate event. It automatically happens. Running a script such as an Excel function or macro, right? So beginning event is a start. Ending event is when your objective is reached and you finish. In the meantime, you can have a series of intermediate events, things that are triggered automatically, where you really don't have to always intervene. Simply put, it's a handoff between activities controlled by something else or someone else, right? So it could be timed or untimed. Let's go to the next one. So the next flow object is called an activity, which is possibly the most important piece of the puzzle. An activity is something that is actively done, which is a task. Something that we do, that something needs to be done. Driving, parking the car, entering, opening the door, entering the lobby, getting a ticket, standing in line, waiting for a call, walking up to the desk, requesting specific service, receiving the paper, filling out the paper form, returning the paper form, waiting for confirmation, producing documents, receiving documents and confirmation, producing payment, receiving payment confirmation, walking up to the camera, receiving picture taken confirmation, returning to desk, receiving final form and receipt. leave lobby, close door, get in the car. So just from top of my head, just trying to go through in my mind all the different activities you need to do. So these are all these different tasks you need to do. So doing something, sending communication, receiving communication, or the entire retinue of things that I just mentioned. Find a recipe, prepare a food, search for products, say okay Google or Alexa, convene a meeting, fill in a procurement order, pick something, stow something, package a good, offer a service. All of these things are activities. Now, do realize activities can have sub-processes with multiple internal activities with feedback and communication, right? For example, you hand in your documents and maybe they'll ask you a series of questions and you respond to each question. And those would all become parts of sub-processes within that activity, which is interact with clerk. So they can have many more push and pull notifications. So that would be an example of a sub-process, right? So the minute you've set something up and anytime you swipe, it's starting a series of sub-processes. Sub-processes are typically shown as, what do you call it? So let me see if I can highlight it. This plus arrow or plus sign out there, which basically means the Q&A process has other sub-processes. The send order, refund order are just distinct tasks and activities. So begin customer Q&A, start relocation, these would be different types of sub-processes. Now, sub-processes can be used to show different levels of detail and different levels of abstraction. So you can go deeper and deeper and deeper to show all these different sub-processes. Flow objects. Next one is called a gateway. So what is a gateway? This is actually interesting because this comes as a mix of logic, business alignment, setups, systems analysis, technology analysis and consulting, and computer science, right? So it's a very interesting set. So it's called a gateway. And gateway is nothing but it's a decision point. Oops, we need to know what we need to do if there are exceptions, because at this point, it's only when something can happen that you didn't expect. If it just follows one task after another, such as what happens if you do not have your passport with you? If no passport, show social security card. That would be an example of a decision point. So you've got exclusive or event gateways, which are nothing but the XOR setups. So they're known as exclusive or event gateways when activities are based on either or else then, right? So either that was received or if not else, then what do you do? So for example, if contract is not approved, then you resend the contract to legal. If a customer is top level, offer the most amount of discount. If, on the other hand, a customer is mid-level, offer mid-level discount. If a customer is a basic customer, offer no discounts. So it's typically shown as this diamond with the cross in between, right? The X in between. So it's an exclusive gateway, which is based on either or else and then. Then, of course, you have something called a parallel gateway. So parallel gateway is no longer or, it's an and. So you're saying that you, with XOR, what you're basically saying is you can have multiple different choices and you can go to multiple different sets based on different configurations. If you meet one set, you can go one way. If you don't, you can go another way. Parallel gateways, where multiple activities can be done, is something very interesting. So parallel gateways happen when it branches off into multiple different things that can be done simultaneously. So multiple groups evaluating a candidate, right? So each of them evaluating a candidate separately. But many things are being done. They're not happening in sequence, they're happening in parallel, right? When you're being interviewed, you might have a panel of 3 people interviewing you. The minute you enter the interview room or the interview Teams meeting, the timer starts and each person is evaluating you independently, but they're all evaluating you parallelly. Multiple R&D groups using the same data to use vaccine research or clinical efficacy trials, right? So you've got same, what do you call it, SARS-CoV-2, CoV-2 virus information comes through and different groups start working. You've created a parallel gateway. Something happens, the data comes in, or the virus data comes in, and then different groups start working on it at the same time. So parallel gateways, which are shown as a diamond with a plus instead of an X, when multiple activities are performed at the same time. Then of course you've got inclusive gateways, which are known as OR gateways, where you can decide between multiple substitute choices. So let's think of it. Let's say Giant Eagle makes a decision to be a vaccine delivery unit. Then you now have an inclusive gateway, which is Giant Eagle can now choose between, do we want Pfizer, do we want Moderna, do we want Johnson & Johnson, do we want AstraZeneca, COVID vaccines? Where do you want to get a visa from? Do you want to get it from the embassy in Shanghai or Beijing? Do you want to use Google or Bing? So whenever you have choices, you can just go. So you don't have to, it's not based on a crossing. There's no crossing there. You just have multiple choices. So whenever you have multiple options, you use something called an inclusive gateway. So when, for example, going back to the DMV, they can say, either your passport or your social security card, and of course, so think of it, inclusive gateway 1, and then starts a parallel gateway for either your, what do you call it, existing utility bill or existing property tax bill. So you've got multiple different inclusive gateways going on again. So you're saying that there are multiple different things that could be performed at the same time, but even what's being performed at the same time, you could have multiple different options within that. So that would be an example of and or, right? And when you've got a series of, if this happens, then do that, or else do that, and then do that, then you have an XOR setup. So quick look again. Exclusive gateways based on either or else then. Parallel gateways, which is and, when multiple activities can be done in parallel at the same time. Inclusive gateways, which is or, when you can decide between multiple options, right? Multiple different substitute choices. Then comes connecting objects. So what are these? So these connecting objects connect you to events, gateways, activities, all of them together. The first one is known as a sequence flow, right? So sequence flow is just the simplest one. It just goes one after the other. Walk into the door, stand in queue, walk up to the clerk, provide your documents, or show your documents. So it's a solid line with the arrow linking the process. So what it does is links process activities only within the same process pool or lanes, same functional group. So you have to, within the same set, it has to link it. So typically, whatever your initiative is, everything that is happening at the DMV would be shown as a sequence flow. However, there comes an interesting one, which is a message flow. A message flow is shown as a dashed line with an arrow. This basically starts linking you across different pools. So for example, you're sending something for verification on the cloud. That would be a message flow. While I handing some of my documents and the documents are being reviewed by the clerk at DMV would basically be a sequence flow. So you oftentimes, with message flow, you use something called terms such as throw, which is when you send something, and catch, which is you receive something. And these would oftentimes be interrelated with intermediate events, such as send email and receive email, receive a notification, send a form, receive a form, send a contract, receive a contract, send a document, sign a document, confirm a document, approve a request an approval, confirm an approval. So oftentimes this throw is when it's sent and catch when it's received. That oftentimes can even show you where the waiting bits are and where the delays happen. Send something, and how many times have we seen? For example, when we make a call to customer service, sometimes you'll have to wait for like 30 minutes. And that's you've created a throw, which is a message flow, or in this case, if you're setting up a chat message or just starting a chat session and somebody's taking a long time responding to something, you've thrown something, but there's no catch because nobody's responded to you yet. So once again, sequence flow, one task happening after the other, connected with a solid line and arrow. Message flow, when you're linking across multiple different pools or lanes, sending something and receiving something thrown out, called a throw or a catch. And then, of course, you have something called association, which is nothing but a dotted line with arrow. So association links an activity or event to specific resources. So it ties you to what you need. Remember, we talked about what kind of artifacts do you need? Do you need to check an Excel file, to check a Word file, to check a PDF file, to check a database, to access a data lake, to access a server, to trigger, to link to a sensor? So this is nothing but it links an activity or event to a specific resource, such as documents, databases, sensors, for reading, editing, which is writing. And here you use dotted arrows to show the flow of information. Am I getting something from a database? Am I updating a database? When I finish it, am I rewriting it? Am I updating the database? Things such as that. Am I updating a document? Am I creating a new folder? These would all be examples of association flow. So once again, sequence flow, links between different tasks and activities. Message flow, links across things that are within your control to outside your process and outside your organization. And then association, where you need certain resources to check, to confirm, to validate, to create secure sockets layer mechanism. So in that case, you're suddenly creating an encrypted link to a secure sockets layer transport protocol onto a server that's encrypting the whole set. That would be an association. So sequence, message, and association. Then we come to swim lanes. So swim lanes model activity and process organization and categorization. As we talked about it, a pool is nothing but an organization, a division, a subunit, an initiative. So when you're working as project managers or technology analysts or system consultants and designers and going up to all the way up to a CIO or possibly CEOs of companies, you will be asked for every project, what exactly is the pool? Which basically means, what does the initiative encompass, the project encompass? So a pool can have multiple lanes. Each lane, which is the next piece, so pool is the larger bit. So think of it just like a swimming pool, each with its own lane, and you stay within the lane till you need to access the other lane or access another service somewhere else, like a swimming or a diving platform. Each lane is a functional group focused on achieving, focus on achieving a particular objective. So lanes can be cross-functional task forces or interdepartmental initiatives. For example, product designers, which is its own lane, works with sales, which is another lane, or works with finance, or sales works with finance. Finance works with procurement. Product designers work with procurement. They work with production. They're all doing it together to build a single prototype production run, which is a pool. So you're building a prototype. In order to build a prototype, that's your pool, right? Prototyping. Within that, you've got all your different lanes. Your product designers, your sales, finance, procurement, production. Your activities are moving in between these lanes all the time. Similarly, if you want to recruit candidates, you've got all these different, that's your pool. The recruitment of a candidate is your, in this case, your initiative that you're trying to focus on, this process initiative. Who are the lanes? You've got your HR, it's working with line managers, with IT, with the candidate, third-party relocation services, finance, regulators, all different lanes, where activities, events, parts of the processes, sub-processes move between and across them. So this is an example. So prototype production pool. Let me see if I can, actually, let me get back to the pen for a quick second. And you see that the prototype production pool is there, under which you've got all these different lanes: finance, production, procurement, sales, product designers, right? And they each serve certain activities, and these activities are transferred. When they're transferred across the organization, it's a message flow. When it's a third-party service, it's a message flow, or else it's a straightforward sequence flow. And then, of course, if you ever want to pull something as a resource, production needs to check its own bill of materials, its production master plan, its procurement inventory. Wants to check its inventory. They're accessing a database. In that case, it's an association, and you're using the dotted line to get information from it and update information, because you're pulling something from that and using it up. Last but not the least, something called an artifact. So what exactly are artifacts? So artifacts are nothing but resources used to support and access information and clarifications for the process. Just the way we talked about it, that production needs to know, how much do I have in inventory? But inventory is all in a materials master list. The materials master list is a database which needs to be accessed in order for production to even know how much you have in inventory, so that you can schedule a production run. You might want to check that, do we have a certain SSL, security connection, before we are sending some kind of encrypted, or before we're sending some kind of private message or secure messaging across from one element to another element. So artifacts are resources used to support and access information and clarifications for the process. They are data objects, which is where data can be accessed or stored, and you can have document repositories, so you can have documents. Remember, like old times, they'd go to a big dusty room with hundreds and hundreds of file folders, and then check out each file folder, pull something out, blow on it, get into a coughing fit or a sneezing fit, and then produce a piece of paper. That's an old document repository, or a flat file document repository. Then, of course, you have databases, data lakes, data warehouses, flat files, and so forth. So these are data object artifacts, both documents and databases. Then you have groups. It's nothing but a set of people or systems to support the process. You want to escalate it and say, I have to talk to my supervisor. Your supervisor is a group. You want to talk to a manager. The manager is a group. You want to talk to an expert. The expert is a group. You want to use an IT system. The IT system is a group. So you've got a set of people or systems to support the process. You've got IT systems, which can be software, apps, supercomputing centers, data analytics engines, AI engines, subject matter experts. They're all different groups, right? So those are your groups. And then, of course, you have annotation. Annotation is nothing but you provide some extra clarification, and it's typically shown as this third layer bracket with or an open third layer bracket without any close, and you write on your clarifications. This is why we did this. This is why we didn't do this. However, in this, if there are certain circumstances where need to be done, or this was last updated this point of time. So those are nothing but annotations, extra information for clarification of a process or process activity. And that's it.